Imagine a kingdom where kings are poisoned, murdered, or violently overthrown. I'm David Cott, host of New History of Spain, and in episode 18 we will uncover the brutal power struggles of the Visigothic Kingdom during this turbulent era between 612 and 639. We will also explore how the Catholic monarchy justified its rule, and how Visigothic Spania became an unexpected cultural beacon during a time of widespread decline in Europe. Sisebut, the Cultivated King. We left off in episode 17 how the Visigoths became Catholic under Recared, with the death of King Gandemar in 612 and the enthronement of Sisebut. Most people today have never heard of him, but Sisebut was a key figure in Visigothic history. He was the most cultivated king the kingdom ever had, a skilled warrior and a devout Catholic. He also introduced harsh anti-Jewish laws that shaped the kingdom in the 7th century. Intellectually, Sisebut could only be compared to his contemporary, the Byzantine Emperor Heraclius. Both share interests in history, philosophy, theology, poetry, and astronomy. The similarities didn't end there, as both were advised by prominent scholars, Sisebut by Isidore of Seville and Heraclius by Stephen of Alexandria. Sisebut promoted a cultural revival in the Visigothic kingdom, countering the decline seen in much of Europe. For example, he encouraged Isidore to write his famous Etymologies, an encyclopedic work that remained a key source of knowledge throughout the Middle Ages in Europe. Sisebut also used writing for political purposes, forging alliances and criticizing enemies. He wrote about a martyr to denounce the Frankish kings of Burgundy and sent letters to the Lombard king Adolald, urging him to convert his people to Catholicism. Sisebut was familiar with the ideas of good governance circulating in 7th century Europe, particularly those from the Byzantine Empire. These ideas promoted a strong centralized rule, and the Caesaro-Papists believed that Christian kings had the duty to suppress sin and lead morally exemplary lives. For instance, Sisebut reprimanded the Bishop of Tarragona for being too fond of theatre, which Christians at the time frowned upon. He also urged a retired bishop to leave his monastery and return to active service. In 612, the first year of Sisebut's reign, 2 eclipses occurred. In that age of superstition, many saw such events as signs of divine displeasure. Beyond Iberia, the Persian Sasanian Empire was waging a devastating war against the Byzantines. Some scholars and clergy believe these events signaled the imminent apocalypse. To address these fears, Sisebut asked Isidore of Seville to write a rational explanation for eclipses. The king himself later wrote a treatise on the subject, using classical sources to explain the phenomenon. Sisebut's military campaigns and anti-Jewish policies. Sisebut wasn't just a cultural king, he was also an excellent warrior, diplomat, and devout Christian ruler, qualities expected of a good Christian monarch. His most notable military campaign targeted the Byzantine province of Spania. Taking advantage of the Byzantine Empire's struggles against Persia, Sisebut's forces conquered key cities like Medina Sidonia and Malaga in 615. A navy also played a crucial role, showing that the Visigoths could wage war at sea as well as on land. Despite being on the brink of fully conquering Byzantine Spania, Sisebut chose to negotiate peace. The Byzantines acknowledged the loss of territory, leaving them with only Cartagena and its surrounding area, as well as the Balearic Islands and Ceuta. This decision to end the war and release captives may have been a gesture of Christian solidarity, especially after the Persian conquest of Jerusalem shocked Christendom. Sisebut's military successes weren't limited to the south. He also led raids against the Astures in modern-day Asturias, although he never subdued the Cantabrian Mountains. However, Sisebut's reign is perhaps most notable for his anti-Jewish policies. The laws inherited from Rome and enacted by earlier kings like Recared weren't enough for him. He banned Jews from owning Christian slaves, increased penalties for Jewish proselytism, and imposed stricter punishments on Christian converts to Judaism. These measures, however, were only a prelude to his most drastic decree. forcing all Jews in the Visigothic Kingdom to convert to Catholicism. The enforcement of this policy must have been poor and inconsistent, as later kings continued to reiterate and expand anti-Jewish laws until the Muslim conquest. But why did Sisebut enact such measures, and why did the Visigothic Kingdom become the state with the harshest anti-Jewish laws of the 7th century? As I discussed in a YouTube short, Christians of Mahon, Menorca, had already forced the conversion of Jews in the early 5th century. Attitudes toward Jews in Hispania were increasingly hostile, but they didn't form a particularly wealthy group, so economics wasn't a significant factor here, as it was in later periods like the Middle Ages. The motivation to marginalize Jews and force their conversion was ideological and religious, as historian Raúl González Salinero argues. Visigothic monarchs and many clergy believed that only one faith should exist within a kingdom. Interestingly, anti-Jewish policies often came from the kings rather than the church. This reflected the Caesaro-Papist belief that monarchs were the spiritual shepherds of their people, tasked with protecting them from sin and heresy and leading them to salvation. Sisebut likely saw the eclipses and fears of the Last Judgment as additional reasons to act. Similar fears later led to increased persecution of Jews and homosexuals at the end of the Visigothic Kingdom, as I explained in the episode The Cruel Fate of Gays in Visigothic Iberia, available on my YouTube channel. Additionally, reports of Jewish collaboration with Persian invaders in the Byzantine Empire may have raised suspicions of Jewish disloyalty in Hispania. However, Sisebut's forced conversions created a new problem: crypto-Jews, meaning Jews who converted outwardly but secretly practiced their faith. Isidore of Seville, while a close friend and supporter of Sisebut, disagreed with this policy despite having written a treatise against Jews himself. He criticized the king for, quote, bringing Jews to the Catholic faith by force, showing great zeal but little wisdom, for he used power when he should have persuaded with the reason of faith, end quote. Nonetheless, the church didn't strongly oppose Sisebut's actions. While the Fourth Council of Toledo later condemned forced conversions, it declared them irreversible. Essentially, the church's stance was akin to saying, sorry, but not sorry. Suintila, the Unifier of Spania? In 621, King Sisebut died under unclear circumstances. Some say it was from natural causes, but rumors suggest poisoning. Just a few days after succeeding him, his son Receret II also died under strange circumstances. This suggests that both Sisebut and Receret II were likely poisoned. After their deaths, the Visigothic Kingdom faced a 3-month period without a ruler before an experienced general, Suintila, was elected King of the Goths. Renowned for his victories in the north and against the Byzantines, the first 5 years of Suintila's reign were marked by stability and military success. To solidify his rule, possibly tied to suspicions of his involvement in the deaths of Sisebut and Receret II, Suintila rallied the kingdom's troops to fight the Vascons. Some historians believe a civil war might have broken out during the interregnum, with Vasconic groups getting involved to support one side or another, as they had done in the past. Others think Suintila's campaign was simply a response to Vasconic raiders who had attacked the region around Zaragoza, as mentioned in a letter from the city's bishop. Regardless, Isidore of Seville compared Suintila to the Roman general and statesman Pompey, as Suintila secured the unconditional surrender of the enemy Vascons. Beyond collecting tribute and taking hostages, he also forced them to help build the city of Ologicus, likely Olite, in modern Navarre, much like Pompey had founded Pamplona. Suintila's greatest achievement was driving the Byzantines out of Spania. The warrior king took advantage of the Byzantine Empire's dire situation during its conflicts with the Persians to conquer their last holdings in the southeastern Iberian Peninsula, centered around Cartagena, Murcia. After a prolonged siege, the Goths captured Cartagena and burned it to the ground, reducing the city to rubble, as evidenced by chronicles and archaeological findings analyzed by Jaime Vizcaíno Sánchez. Cartagena's destruction in 625 led to its abandonment, and it wasn't resettled until the 9th century. During the Andalusi period, Murcia became the most important city in the region. It is speculated that Suintila ordered the city's total destruction due to its symbolic role as the capital of Byzantine Spania and its former metropolitan seat, as well as fears that the Byzantines might attempt to reconquer it. Following the fall of Cartagena, the Byzantine Empire retained only the Balearic Islands and Ceuta within the boundaries of modern Spain, territories that remained under Byzantine control until the Muslim conquest. Isidore of Seville praised Suintila as the first Visigothic king to unify Spania. Some historians, such as José Sotochica, have taken this claim literally, arguing that Suintila ruled the entire Iberian Peninsula. However, this Spanish nationalist interpretation is incorrect, as it ignores documentary and archaeological evidence proving that much of the north was never under Visigothic control. The north, from central Asturias to most of Navarre, remained stateless and governed only by local powers. These peripheral and marginal areas were beyond the reach of the Visigothic Kingdom, which at most could occasionally collect tribute and forge alliances with local elites. But again, these areas were never under Gothic rule at any point in history. If you have enjoyed this episode so far, don't forget to subscribe to the show. You can also support me on Patreon, Apple Podcasts, or with a one-time donation. And here is the secret question for this episode. Did you think the Visigoths ruled the entire Iberian Peninsula? Let me know in the comments. Opposition to Suintila. Despite his military achievements, Suintila faced significant internal challenges during the latter half of his reign. His generosity toward aristocrats, clergy, and the poor wasn't enough to stop some factions from turning against him, especially after he tried to establish his own dynasty by making his son co-ruler in 626. From this point on, sources began to portray Suintila as a power-hungry tyrant. At the Fourth Council of Toledo in 633, the bishops accused Suintila of confiscating church property, calling it his greatest crime. However, these accusations were made after Suintila was overthrown, so they should be taken with caution. Suintila's efforts to strengthen the monarchy ultimately failed, unlike the successes of Leovigild and Recared. Plots against him grew, and although he stopped some of them, his harsh responses made him appear increasingly cruel and despotic. By 630, discontent reached a tipping point. A group of magnates led by the Duke of Septimania, Sisenand, rebelled against Suintila with foreign support. Sisenand gained the backing of Dagobert I, the powerful Frankish king of Austrasia, Neustria, and Burgundy, by promising him one of the Visigothic royal treasury's greatest treasures, a golden plaque given to King Thorisman by the Roman general Aetius after the Battle of the Catalonian Plains. Initially, Suintila had strong backing, especially in the regions of Baetica and Lusitania. However, as the rebels and Frankish forces advanced, many of Suintila's supporters abandoned him, including his own brother. With only a few loyalists left, Suintila had no choice but to surrender to Sisenand in Zaragoza and plead for mercy in exchange for giving up the throne. As had happened before with Athanagild and his Byzantine allies, Sisenand became king of the Visigoths in 639 thanks to foreign intervention. Sisenand and the Fourth Council of Toledo. The way Sisenand came to power and the legitimacy, or lack thereof, of his reign deeply influenced his 5 years as king. Unlike some earlier kings who ruled in an authoritarian manner, Sisenand relied on compromises with powerful secular magnates and church leaders to secure his position. His first major challenge was repaying his debt to the Frankish king Dagobert. The Gothic aristocracy pressured Sisenand to avoid handing over Aetius' symbolic gold plaque and instead offer a large sum of money worth significantly more in gold than the plaque itself. Meanwhile, the faction that had supported Suintila rebelled and backed a rival claimant, as evidenced by coins found by archaeologists. This faction was strong in Lusitania and Baetica, but Sisenand defeated them. Afterward, Sisenand convened a general council in Toledo to consolidate and legitimize his rule. Since the Visigoths' conversion to Catholicism in 589, no kingdom-wide council had been held. That changed in December 633, when the Fourth Council of Toledo was held under the leadership of Isidore of Seville, attended by 62 bishops and the kingdom's most influential magnates. The councils of Toledo were not merely ecclesiastical assemblies. They served as the primary political forum of the Visigothic Kingdom, similar to the role once held by the Roman Senate. The Fourth Council had a crucial goal: to institutionalize the Visigothic monarchy with a political and religious doctrine devised by Isidore of Seville, a constitutional pact of sorts. This framework aimed to stabilize the kingdom by preventing violent power struggles for the throne, curbing royal abuses of power, and reducing interference from foreign powers. The council also formalized procedures for electing kings. The council addressed many other issues. Bishops were ordered to establish schools to teach theology, medicine, law, and classical languages like Latin and Greek. It also dealt with the controversial forced conversions of Jews under Sisebut. While condemning the use of force, the council declared that those who had converted could not revert to Judaism and prescribed punishments for continuing Jewish practices. Other rulings focused on clerical discipline, church-owned slaves, and tax exemptions for clergy. Isidore of Seville's political philosophy. The first canon of the Fourth Council of Toledo, Canon 75, was the most significant. It was so influential that it was read at all subsequent councils. Canon 75 outlined Isidore of Seville's vision of a Catholic Visigothic monarchy, a kind of social contract. Contrary to popular belief, social contracts were an invention of Enlightenment thinkers. Similar ideas existed in earlier societies. Canon 75 declared that Gothic kings should be chosen through agreements between secular magnates and bishops. Once anointed, the king's authority was considered sacred, like the biblical kings. Loyalty to the king was absolute, and anyone conspiring or taking up arms against him would face excommunication, as rebelling against the king was equated with rebelling against God. This rule applied to both secular elites and church leaders, and included harsh penalties for collaborating with foreign powers. Ironically, King Sisenand had violated many of these later laws to claim the throne. He must have felt very awkward during the council's discussions. Due to his questionable legitimacy and the immense influence of Isidore of Seville, Sisenand had to accept these veiled criticisms and focus on the future. Isidore believed the king was chosen by God and had the duty to govern both the church and the state. Kings and bishops were expected to work together, keeping each other in check to prevent abuses of power. In the Catholic Visigothic Kingdom, the church was an integral part of the state, legitimizing royal authority. Although the king's authority was sacred, Isidore emphasized that kings who failed to abide by the law and acted as tyrants could be excommunicated and lose God's favor. However, like many Catholic thinkers, Isidore did not support rebellion or tyrannicide under any circumstance. He saw bad kings as divine punishments for the people's sins. Subjects were expected to endure tyrants passively and trust that God will ultimately judge them in the afterlife. In Isidore's social contract, the king, secular magnates, and clergy each had obligations. Failing to meet these obligations could result in punishment, whether in this world or the next. Chintila, a king without support. King Sisenand died of natural causes in 636, and the magnates and bishops elected Chintila as his successor. Chintila's reign, however, lasted only 3 years. He quickly convened the Fifth Council of Toledo to secure his authority, as these councils had become a key source of political legitimacy and negotiation. Attendance at this council was low. Only 22 bishops attended, compared to more than 60 at the previous council. Even major bishops from cities like Mérida, Seville, and Córdoba were absent. The council's canons repeatedly warned against conspiracies and rebellion, reflecting Chintila's lack of strong support and his fear for his safety. Some historians believe the low attendance was due to the short notice Chintila gave before the council. Most of the bishops who came were from the capital's province, Carthaginensis. The Fifth Council of Toledo also prohibited the confiscation of properties belonging to the previous king and his supporters, likely an attempt by Chintila and his allies to avoid the confiscations and exiles that had plagued earlier rulers. These measures highlight a recurring problem in the Visigothic Kingdom: internal power struggles. While efforts were made to address these issues, they failed to prevent conspiracies, rebellions, and assassinations. Reports of exiled conspirators plotting abroad and Chintila's attempts at clemency indicate that unrest continued during his reign, although specific details are scarce. Less than 2 years later, Chintila called the Sixth Council of Toledo to strengthen his position. This council had doubled the attendance of the previous one and reaffirmed earlier rulings on the sanctity of the king and the protection of loyalist rights and properties. Amid rising anti-Jewish sentiment across Christendom, the council also passed stricter laws against Jews, prohibiting anyone who wasn't Catholic from living in the kingdom. Chintila died shortly afterward and was succeeded by his son Tolga in 639. The story of Visigothic politics will continue in the next episode, but now let's discuss the cultural powerhouse that was 7th century Visigothic Spania. The culture of Visigothic Spania. As in the rest of post-Roman Christian Europe, ecclesiastical institutions played a key role in preserving, sharing, and producing knowledge in Visigothic Spania. Pagan authors were no longer role models. Instead, Christian thinkers like Augustine of Hippo, Jerome, and Pope Gregory the Great became the main intellectual authorities. This focus on Christian authors led to the loss of many works of philosophy, poetry, and theatre from the Roman period. Some classical texts survive, though often in shortened versions. Similar to the later Muslim period, kings and bishops sent individuals to Constantinople to acquire books unavailable in Iberia. Thanks to these efforts, works like Victor of Tununa's Chronicle, later continued by John of Biclar, were preserved. Monks from North Africa and Greece who migrated to the Visigothic Kingdom also brought rare books. Together with the efforts of the Hispano-Roman Church, these actions helped save some classical knowledge for future generations. However, intellectual life was almost entirely tied to the Church, and the educated clergy were mainly interested in theology. Latin poetry and classical theatre were largely ignored because theatres no longer existed. Clerics were educated in schools attached to cathedrals and monasteries, which often had well-stocked libraries. These schools taught theology and the rituals needed for clerical duties, though many priests and monks were poorly trained due to the lack of resources. In addition to church-run schools, there were secular schools, such as one in the royal court of Toledo, where the sons of magnates and royal officials were educated. Both types of schools focused on practical knowledge and avoided literature deemed unnecessary. Even in remote rural areas, figures like Valerius of Bierzo taught children to read and write using basic tools like slates, as paper and parchment were expensive and scarce. Oral storytelling was just as important, if not more so, than written texts for passing down knowledge. Several Hispano-Gothic intellectuals produced works unmatched in Western Europe at the time. These included Julian of Toledo, Braulio of Zaragoza, Fructuosus of Braga, and Isidore of Seville, the greatest scholar of his time. Isidore's contribution could fill an entire episode, as he wrote on history, ethics, theology, natural sciences, and political thought. In the references for this episode, shared in the pinned YouTube comment, you will find recommendations for reading more about his works. Isidore's most famous works, widely read across medieval Europe, were the Sentences and Etymologies. The Sentences serve as both a guide to Christian beliefs and a manual for leading a moral life. The Etymologies, a massive encyclopedia, combine knowledge from classical and late antique sources on a variety of topics. These included grammar, rhetoric, mathematics, medicine, law, music, geography, and astronomy. Isidore's work was extraordinary, and thanks to him and other bishops, the Visigothic Kingdom became a leading cultural center in Europe, second only to Constantinople.
The verdict!
In today's verdict, I want to discuss why kings like Leovigild and Recared could strengthen the monarchy, but rulers in the early 7th century couldn't replicate their success. Leovigild built his power by confronting internal and external threats, rewarding loyal followers, and solidifying his dynasty. Recared used the conversion of the Visigoths to Catholicism to defeat his enemies and ally with the influential Hispano-Roman Catholic Church. Suintila, as we will explore in the next episode, relied on mass executions, exiles, and property confiscations to secure his position. Why couldn't other kings do the same? The answer lies in the fact that no dynasty could grow rich enough to completely overshadow wealthy landowners. These magnates formed networks of supporters and competed for the same resources. To maintain loyalty, kings gave public offices and gifts to their followers, taking wealth and power from those who opposed them. Since there were no more territories worth conquering in Spania, this constant redistribution of resources created resentment and fueled conspiracies, rebellions, and assassinations. The Visigothic Kingdom of Toledo relied on cooperation between landowners at different levels, but it was also defined by fierce competition among them. And with that, the verdict ends. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, comment, and subscribe to New History of Spain on your favorite podcast app or on YouTube, where you will find more content besides the chronological series. Join my Patreon community at patreon.com/newhistoryspain to get early access to episodes, voting power for future topics, and exclusive merchandise. You can also follow the show on Blue Sky and join our Discord server. Links are in the description. In the next episode, I will cover the reigns of Tolga, Chindasuinth, and Receswin, and take a closer look at the military of the Visigothic Kingdom of Toledo. Thank you for listening, and see you soon!